Hi, everyone. In today's episode of the Depolarizers, I'm in conversation with Reed Howard. Reed helped lead Republicans for Harris in 2024 and Biden Republicans in 2020. Reed worked in the Virginia Senate, and his experience spans local, state, and presidential campaigns. At the age of 20, he was elected to local office where he learned firsthand the importance of empowering young leaders to bring bold ideas to public service. Reed is a 2025 Democracy Practitioner Fellow at the University of Virginia's Karsh Institute of Democracy and a member of the American Enterprise Institute's Millennial Leadership Network. Reed's insights on democracy, effective governance, and politics have been featured in NPR, the Aspen Institute, and the American Democracy Summit. Beyond politics, Reed is a United Methodist minister at Georgetown University and lives in a diverse faith community on campus. Reed has a Master of Divinity with a focus on ethics and moral leadership from Emory University and a Bachelor of Science in Culture and Politics from Georgetown University. Thanks for listening. Reed, thank you so much for joining. It's good to see you.
It's so good to see you too. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, my friend. I feel so special that I get to talk to one of my buddies on the Depolarizers podcast. So thank you for joining, and I'm excited to have a very robust conversation today.
Me too.
All right. So Reed, you led Republicans for Biden in 2020 and Republicans for Harris in this past election cycle. So why did you start these coalitions, and what was people's responses to them in each cycle?
So we really started Biden Republicans as a grassroots organization because people kept on asking for ways to be involved that honored the fact that they were a Republican. And we saw that there was a real need to create a permission structure where folks could hold on to this identity that really mattered to them and make a clear statement that Donald Trump was unacceptable to them, to their conservative values, and to their identity as a Republican. And that's how it got started. We put together a social media account, did a call for like-minded folks, and we organized virtual town halls. The pandemic had just started coming underway, and we had a guest speaker. We had about 13 people show up to that first meeting, and we felt pretty good about that. We're like, okay, there's 13 Republicans. And then in the next meeting, we had about 30 come. And then we said, let's organize another rally so people can know how to talk to their Republican family members and neighbors about why they too should make the decision to put country over party. We had about 300 people come to that next one. And then by the fifth time we hosted it, we had about 3,000 people. We decided to start broadcasting that to a bigger audience on social media. And towards the end of the campaign, we had about 400,000 people who participated in these virtual rallies. Just like think about it. There's Republicans coming to learn to talk to other Republicans about why they should support the Democratic nominee. It was a historic sign that the leader of the Republican Party was unfit to serve at the time. And that energy for people understanding something was wrong and still needing a tribe to hold on to, I think is one of the biggest lessons that remains relevant today. We are a tribal people. Politics needs to be community-based and community-driven, and finding ways for people to take a fundamental step like breaking with your own party requires that coalition building and that sense of community.
I love that. That is incredible. Going from 13 to 400,000. That is quite the increase there. So can you talk a little bit more about your Republicans for Harris work this past year? Why did you think that to be important for that election cycle in particular? And maybe what were some of your most proud moments from that cycle?
Yeah, absolutely. Coming out of January 6th, there was a whole new wave of conservatives and Republicans who were uncomfortable with Donald Trump's leadership. And of course, throughout all of the court cases and then ultimately his conviction, there were new people who were saying, this is unacceptable in a leader. And so we actually had a huge level of interest from people who hadn't traditionally opposed Donald Trump. And we knew that it was important to build the the new community of folks who were willing to vote for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump because of the issue of democracy. For most of these folks, they weren't necessarily voting for Kamala Harris, they were voting against Donald Trump. And we wanted to allow them to continue to say, no, I'm a Republican. I still believe in these conservative values. I'm not 100% on board with the policy agenda of a potential Harris administration, but it's the right thing to do for the fundamental values of our nation. Some of the biggest lessons, so that there was both an online version that kind of mirrored what we had found success doing during the pandemic, but then there was a really robust field program as well, where people were doing multiple events a week in the swing states, specifically for Republicans for Harris, because we knew how salient that tribal identity was. And ultimately, it didn't result in a win at that level. And the ability to reach persuadable Republicans who maybe voted for Biden was really negatively influenced by Biden's popularity, by some of the perceived effectiveness of the Biden administration. And we can't overstate the impact, the at a global scale, how voters were feeling about the economy and about incumbents. Incumbents across the world lost in this election. So there were some real successes, being able to mobilize people on the ground and online to go out and vote. It didn't have the results that we wanted. I think we have to be honest about that. However, I still think that model of creating new tribes and new ways for people to identify in politics to break out into some more pro democracy behavior is going to be necessary as we move forward.
Absolutely. And the thing that I love the most about the work that you've done in these two cycles is like, this is literally the reason why Welcome was started, right? Like, we wanted to make a welcoming home for Republicans who didn't want to align with the more extremist elements of their party. And so we could build a coalition on the left for people to feel they could be part of. And even again, like now, like making sure that people feel welcome with the Democratic Party who are actually Democrats, right? So we'll talk about that another time. But say that to say, building coalitions is important in politics, period, right? So thinking about this coalition that you just spoke of, the reasons why people were interested in voting for Biden and why people were interested in voting for Harris, what were some of the reasons why even the most centrist Republicans didn't vote for Harris, do you think? And do you think that her authenticity and trueness as a centrist played a role in that, particularly because she was so left in the 2019-2020 cycle?
Absolutely. Harris was an incredible centrist to so many voters who were center right or conservative that voted for Joe Biden in 2020. That's just the pure fact. A lot of it has to do with the statements she took in her 2019 primary and not effectively communicating that she had changed her opinion on that. She was unwilling to say, beyond my values have remained the same, but my policies have changed. She was unwilling to dive into the specifics of that. And I think people had a lot of unanswered questions. That ultimately hurt her. And I think being authentic and having a lifetime of commitment to a particular set of values, something voters really care about currently. And I imagine that will remain true moving forward. Think about someone like Bernie Sanders, who has been a diehard Democratic socialist his whole life. And when he broke out on the national stage in 2016, people really responded to that authenticity. That's why I think someone like Andy Bashir, who's been governing in a pragmatic way throughout his career, or Josh Shapiro, who has been an incredible leader in Pennsylvania, will really attract some of the centrist and center-right voters in elections moving forward.
Well, I love that you named some folks that you've been keeping an eye on because obviously, well, one, we want to invite them to Welcome Fest. And two, we want to make sure that, a lot of people have a better understanding of who's out there, right? Because a lot of the time, people have conversations and they're like, I'm so fed up with the left or the right or whatever. I don't see people who are inspiring me to think that things are going to get any better. So you just naming people right there just is also helpful too, because people then can have an eye to, what people they could maybe be paying attention to know that this coalition building can happen. So, speaking of people who are depolarizing in nature, this work is depolarizing in nature, right? Because it is, trying to create centrist coalition, trying to bring people together. Can you talk more about maybe why depolarizing work in general helps the entire political ecosystem and the country and voter sentiment towards politics?
Absolutely. Well, first, just look around. Like, politics doesn't feel good right now. The country is hurting. There's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of confusion, and people are exhausted. Folks want to see leaders who are willing to roll up their sleeves and work with people they might disagree with to deliver real results for their communities. That's the most important thing. I think that's why Donald Trump's popularity has declined so rapidly since the election, because they see him fighting these culture war battles that they did not elect him to solve. Now, those of us who are following the election closely know Trump is doing exactly what he said he was going to do. But a lot of people pulled that lever to vote for him because they wanted lower prices on their goods. They wanted to feel more safe in their communities. And they look at things like the chaos that's coming out of Washington and the needless cruelty that we're hearing from Donald Trump and some of his closest followers at the federal level. And the voters are asking, how does this help me? How does this help me pay my bills, get a better education for my kids, have a safer walk through my neighborhood? And I think voters are fed up by that. And so the good news is that there actually are a lot of public servants who want to get things done for their communities. The Get Shit Done caucus is actually pretty big. And what we have to do is go out and find those people and support their leadership. And I would encourage anybody who's listening to this podcast to look into who their local leaders are, the folks on their city council or on their school board or even their state representative, because most of the times those local leaders are really pragmatic and they're trying to get things done. They're delivering results. And so we should be focused on promoting the people who might not be as famous, who might not be social media stars, but who are doing the work and getting them to grow in their leadership at other levels of government.
Yeah, I admire that advice a lot because it is definitely imperative now for people to see themselves as leaders, particularly if you are going to take a pragmatic approach to politics and governing and ensure that you are operating for the best of the community and not for the spiciness of whatever party you prescribe to. So speaking of factionalism, as we talk about pragmatism and more centrist faction building, you've been working on exposing more center-right people to factionalism and even why third parties don't win and why it's important to build durable coalitions through Maverick, your Substack. What has been some of the response from some of the people in your network in Maverick and your subscribers on the right to this concept of a durable centrist coalition that is cross-partisan? And what do you think that could look like over the next 2 to 4 to 6 years?
People want to contribute positively right now, and they're eager for ways to do that. And the trick is finding ways to channel energy productively. There's a lot of ways to engage in quote unquote resistance right now that just contributes to noise on social media or further polarizes us. And so I really want people to be focused on, how can I make folks kinder to one another in a way that actually makes a difference? That's how you depolarize. Treat other people as human beings, as fellow Americans who share your values, and as people who actually want to solve problems. So I've been advocating folks in the center right focus on faction building. creating parties within the two existing parties. Like, this is where, Lauren, why I love to talk with you and Liam and the folks at Welcome, because you get this. Like, we're not going to be able to create a third party, but we can carve out identities within our party that goes back to what I was talking a little bit earlier about the tribalism. You can't ask someone to abandon a leader, like someone like Donald Trump or someone like Bernie Sanders, if there's not an alternative positive vision that they can go towards. So that's what it looks like to carve out a new faction in our politics. And high level game plan is, one, we need to build the grassroots infrastructure. Moderates and centrists need a backbone. And that means finding local networks of leaders who can organize their communities, who can then go out and advocate for their shared values, and then counteract the influence of extremism. Be like, no, that is not how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to do it. And here's the way you can productively organize with other like-minded folks. So that's first. We need to build that grassroots infrastructure. The second thing we have to do is actually show up in primaries. So extremists dominate primaries because moderates stay home. And this is the number one thing that we need to do in order to change the way that things are going in this country. We have to mobilize the middle to vote, and not just vote, to volunteer and to campaign in the early stages, like primaries. Then I think the third thing is we have to actually support those pro-democracy candidates. So it's not just about rejecting extremism. It's about finding leaders, electing leaders, elevating those types of leaders who have the values that we share. So integrity, collaboration, problem solving. We have to go out and actively recruit, fund, and then support those candidates. The fourth piece is we need to create the centrist media ecosystem. This is why this is one of my favorite podcasts. This is why folks like The Bulwark are great, because the far left and the far right both have factions that dominate the conversation, right? They've built and own their own media outlets so that they can amplify their views, so that they can pump up their own candidates. And we have to do the same. I think people too often in the moderate middle or in the space of civility don't want to do the partisan battle of politics. And like in the American system, there is no getting out of it. So we have to create our own moderate media ecosystem. And then the fifth thing is that we have to organize. We can't just debate. This battle for American democracy is not about being right. It's about being organized. We have to stop arguing online and start actually mobilizing people.
Yeah, that's one of Liam's favorite phrases is organize, not debate. I feel that. I think the only counter is maybe not just doing it as much online, but in person, right? If that makes sense, only because I'm not really ever looking for a debate, especially not politics. Pick a different subject, right? But like when you talk to people, I do think it is important to challenge people's, statements when you feel like they are not necessarily the most productive, or when you feel like they are polarizing in nature again. And yeah, I'm not going to go down my rabbit hole there, but I do think that positive discourse and dialogue that produces the centrist faction building you want is important, only because when you think about the not grassroots level, which is like all the people in DC, those people we need to be talking, right? We need to be talking.
Yeah.
So at the grassroots level, yeah, definitely organize, not debate. But at the top roots, yeah, we gotta. I mean, grass tops, we gotta figure some stuff out.
Oh, well, absolutely. Well, and I even think at the grassroots level, we should be having persuasive conversations too, right? Democracy depends on our ability to find common ground with one another. That means talking to folks. That means becoming friends with folks from communities that aren't like yours. It's about ushering consensus and then moving forward together. And I think that's something that we forget in this like hyper polarized time, is that we actually need to have relationships and community with folks who aren't like us. That's part of what we're preserving. That's preserving the values that makes democracy possible, mutual respect, shared purpose, the belief that we're stronger together than we are apart. Like, we need all of those things to happen. I wouldn't call that debate, right? That's living out our values and showing a positive vision of what we can offer that some of the polarizers cannot.
Yeah, I totally see what you mean. I do think that that is a good distinction. Arguing to get nowhere versus having the conversations that help us to flesh out problem solving a little bit better. I think that's a good way to put it. Again, sorry, not to go down my rabbit hole. But okay, so let's talk a little bit more about, I guess, speaking of debate, let's talk a bit more about, I want to call it intra-party dissent, but on the right, it's a little harder to call that intra-party dissent. So the left has had this tug of war, progressives versus centrists. We're part of that tug of war / conversation. But in the right's case, it's kind of like right populists versus actual ideological conservatives, principled conservatives, maybe. I don't know if you want to, whatever, mush them together. So what do you think is going to come of some of that conversation on the right over the next few years?
Look, I'm deeply troubled by what we're seeing on the right, especially by the rise of nativism in the party, the rise of demonizing folks who we might not agree with or folks who are from different backgrounds of us. It's a real problem. And the fact that it has been a winning strategy now for the last 12 years within the Republican Party means that it's going to stick around for a little bit. It's going to take a really concerted effort to push that ideology out of the GOP. And it might be something that we are contending with for the next 20 to 30 years of our political life. The values of liberal democracy, of an open society, of a place that embraces pluralism, that needs a champion. And it requires people to be courageous. And it requires, in particular, leaders to step up and speak out. A lot of folks have written off Washington and said that there's no way we're going to have an elected senator or representative speak out against Donald Trump and some of the loudest siren voices. And I would just push back on that and say maybe nobody currently exists that's willing to do that. But at the end of the day, the biggest way to shift the narrative and to shift the ideology of the party is by electing a leader who can win on those ideas. That's the lifeblood of politics, is winning elections. And so we have to be engaging in the battle of politics in order to win the ideology debate. In the conservative kind of history, William F. Buckley really pioneered this fusionist model of conservative politics. And Ronald Reagan was the one who was able to give it force. He gave those ideas force because he won. And I don't think we're going to be able to have the meaningful shift back towards a more pro-democracy, pro-pluralism Republican Party without an elected leader who can take us there. So we need to generate ideas. We need those think tanks to form. We need that media ecosystem to be sharing ideas. We need the grassroots folks to organize and mobilize and not give up hope. But ultimately, it's going to take a leader to run on these ideas to bring them to life.
Can you speak more to maybe even non-elected leadership in the right that is not, the populist right or even the MAGA right, if you want to call it that? Maybe what does leadership in the center right look like right now? And I think that can be obviously people who have podcasts, people who are, getting influence in the media, people who have served maybe the local level, who are still, leaders in some ways. I guess maybe help me understand, what I don't want to call it center right all the time, but what are conservatives on the right who are not extremists? What can they be doing right now to engage in politics in a way that is helpful and depolarizing?
So the landscape has been winnowing on that front for the last, decade plus. And the folks who remain have been in this fight for a long time, and I respect the heck out of. And so there's the Dispatch, which is a principled conservative outlet. There's the Bulwark, whom I love, who are more pugnacious and are really fun in the way that they're approaching what could be on the center right and speaking out for the truth. There's some great think tanks. I think AEI is putting out really solid evidence-based scholarship and policy papers. The Niskanen Center is a really fascinating home that blends both Republican and Democratic perspectives and puts those scholars from across the political spectrum in conversation with one another, which I think is really valuable. There's groups like Principles First that are mobilizing voters and getting folks together to have conversations about tried and true American values and the principles that we hold dear as a republic. There's incredible organizers like Mormon Women for Ethical Government who are talking about the values that we need in our leaders, and they're actually getting specific on some of the issues. They're suing and many times winning court cases to secure rights for people across the country. And a lot of those women come from conservative or center-right backgrounds. And so there's a lot of really interesting seeds that are being planted right now. I think the trick is we need more. This is a time for building. And if you have an idea, I need you, the center right needs you, like we need you to go and do something about that. Connect with other people who are doing this work, learn from them, be in partnership and collaborate with them. But we need new ideas and fresh thinking in this space. So, it can be daunting to look at everything that we're up against and the steep hill that we have to climb. But the trick is to start small, but start, and you'll see how things grow from there. So that's really what we need. We have to get really clear about a positive vision that's not MAGA, that's not extremist, that's not demonizing people, of how the center can improve people's lives. I still think that that's a bit of an open conversation. Lauren, I'm really curious to hear where you think the center left is on developing that positive agenda for folks. I think specifically on the center right, the grassroots infrastructure is really underdeveloped, and we need leaders in local communities across the country to step up so that when candidates emerge, they have a natural base of support. And then we need to invest heavily in recruiting leaders who can run for local office. So all of those things that I talked about are roles for civic leaders who maybe aren't running for office or aren't currently in elected office. And that's what it's going to take, right? We are going to have to build the base that then elected leaders can take and actually begin to put up some wins on the board. How does that relate to where things are at in the center left right now?
Well, at first, I appreciate that answer. It's very thoughtful and helpful. And I have another question for you about Principles First. So before I get there, but just quickly, Welcome is a home for the center on the Democratic side. And we focus on prioritizing voices who are depolarizers, voices who are advocating for liberal democracy, fighting illiberalism, addressing the concerns of voters of facing the reality of public opinion, right? And essentially, just trying to make sure that we're rooting out extremism, polarization, and illiberalism that we often find on the left, and obviously on the right as well. But we focus on our own and try to make sure that we can create the home. Because, like I said before, I am increasingly having conversations and talking to folks who should be base Democratic voters, and they don't want to be part of the party anymore because of the illiberalism on the left. And it is very problematic. It's very concerning because, we've had Dee Quill on this podcast before, and she talks about how, it's very helpful if you want to be an independent to be an independent-minded Democrat or an independent-minded Republican, right? Because we live in a two-party system. Let's be thorough in our faction building and cultivate, like you were just saying, cultivate the faction that you want to be a part of. So that's what we try to do at Welcome. I'm not going to go down my Welcome rabbit hole there, but I appreciate the question because I do think it is a great opportunity. And obviously, keep plugging Welcome Fest, because Welcome Fest is our public gathering, had 300 centrists in DC last year, and planning to do that again with more people in DC on June 4th. So if anyone's listening who wants to sign up for Welcome Fest, please check out welcomestack.org and you can find out information on it. So last question before we get into our final question for the afternoon. So talk to me more about this year's Principles First conference, because I think I saw you shortly after you went to Principles First a few weeks ago. And I'd love to hear, some of your story about what you experienced, and also like maybe in what ways do Principles First, organizers and attendees plan to address what we're seeing on the right over the next few years. I know you already talked about it a little bit, but if there's anything else you wanted to talk on that specifically.
This year's Principles First Summit was super inspiring. They had over 1,000 people from 45 states fly in, come to be a part of it. And we had conversations about the state of our democracy, about what we can do in our local communities, that it is helpful just to be with one another and to show that there actually is a really strong base of people who want problem solvers, who are tired of this bare knuckle fight politics. And so we got together and we celebrated, and Mark Cuban came and got to share the work that he's doing to lower healthcare prices and drug costs in the country. We had Governor Jared Polis speak about how he's trying to preserve liberty and an open society in Colorado, and what the Democratic Party needs to do to win back the trust of voters. We had, incredible leaders like Joe Walsh and Bill Kristol and Sarah Longwell speak about what they're seeing and hearing from center-right voters across the country. So it was a really interesting blend of Republican speakers and Democratic speakers and independents like Mark Cuban who came together. Coming out of the summit, people are fired up to go back to their communities and find other like-minded folks. Principles First is launching a series of dinners across the country to bring together folks in their communities. And my understanding is that they're going to use those dinners as launching pads for folks who want to get more involved locally in politics. So I'm excited. A lot of new projects come out of this summit every year. People find like-minded folks that want to collaborate on something and then get going. So there is energy there. So if you're on the center left and you want to find a group like that, you should go to Welcome Fest, because you will find folks who are thinking about the world maybe in the same way you are. You are not alone. You're not crazy. These are really dark times, and it's helpful to find folks. And then if you're on the center right, I think Principles First is a really good place to plug in as well. So principlesfirst.us is the website. They have events all across the country that are going, and it's a good place to find a way to be productive in this era of polarization.
I appreciate that so much. And I'm glad that it was a good experience this year. As you noted, Welcome Fest is modeled after Principles First. So we really appreciate the model that Principles First and you guys have set for the center left here. All right, Reed, final question, the one that we ask everyone. What is one depolarizing activity that our listeners can participate in to help depolarize our politics?
I think the number one thing is to go do something in your community. The other day, I went with my church and we made meals for kids who were hungry. And it was not politics related at all, but it was so fun to just get together with the people who I live with in my neighborhood and do something for folks in need. And building up that connective tissue is the number one thing that we can do to depolarize our communities. Life is so much bigger than politics. So if, you're over indexing time on Twitter and reading the news and worried about the world, of course you're going to be distraught and think that things are homeless. But if you actually, get outside and start talking to your neighbors and help serving your community, that is what we need in order to build the democracy that thrives, that we want. Mother Teresa said, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family. And I think we need a lot more of that. I think we need more time with our loved ones, more time with our friends, more time going to trivia and book clubs, and helping feed people in need than we need fighting these political battles.
1000%. I couldn't agree more with that. I very often find myself not on my phone, trying to not get distracted by, like you said, just the craziness that's going on. And yeah, when you focus on your own community, when you focus on your own family, you not only are rejuvenated and, like your cup's poured back into, but you also, like you said, you get to serve, you get to help other people, which is also incredibly fulfilling as humans, and meets the needs that we have for community and fellowship. So I'm always a huge fan of getting out and doing things and just spending time, being with people in real life and not online. Reed, you're amazing. Thank you so much for spending time today, and looking forward to catching up with you again in the future.
Absolutely. It's so fun to get to do this work with you and to have this cross-partisan friendship. I'm so grateful for what you all are doing and that we get to do this work together because we're better together.
100%. We are definitely better together. Thank you so much, Reed.
See ya.